I have a question for Ravana about the taxes. Have you considered looking at the flip side? Like, should, you know, AI workers or robot workers be taxed like humans versus reducing the human tax?
That is something has been proposed by researchers. I'm thinking if we are making tax policy to solve the problem of worker displacement, the first thing, the way I would approach it, the first approach would be what is the least cost solution and what is the least distortionary. So the way expensing in tax principles is different from subsidy is that expensing are not distortionary versus the subsidy can be harmful in a way that in cases of AI is actually augmenting the worker rather than automating, then it would be in turn an unexpected tax on labor itself. So until we figure out how much augmentation is happening versus automation, let's do something that's not distortionary. Let's do something that's tax neutral. So that's why this is my proposal instead of taxing AI. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I'm Dee Cavello. I lead the Emerging Tech program at the Aspen Institute. And actually, I really appreciated that both Sydney and Ravana, you had kind of examples of leveraging market dynamics and how we might be able to kind of price in the values that we wish to see. And so I wanted to ask Sydney in terms of how we might actually go about. I think that your proposal for, beginning to put a statistical price on privacy is really powerful. What are some of the inputs to that you'd like to see considered? And what are some of the things that you think might make that more complicated?
Yeah. So definitely a complicated thing to do. People have asked me a lot of times, like with the social cost of carbon, it's one number. There's a lot of different inputs that go into privacy. There are a lot of inputs that went into that, but it is a little bit harder to kind of understand how that would map on exactly. It is one that people understand, but the one that actually I would point to that I think is a little bit of a better example is that with the Clean Water Act or specific chemicals, we actually have different ranges and different ways in which we can measure them for specific chemicals and different pollutants. And so you might say, for example, with like healthcare data, we should think about it in this way, and we can have a flexible approach to that. With financial data, we would think about it this way, and we would also do that, which maps onto things like mercury or lead, which again have like a slightly more flexible dynamic in terms of what goes into it. So the way that we usually get to this is the concept of people's willingness to pay to offset a harm that they see happening to them. So that would be through revealed preferences or stated preferences. Revealed preferences are like my favorite. There's some really amazing ways in which we've done that in the environmental space or with the statistical value of life. We could do that. It's a question of conversely actually getting the right data to be able to measure these impacts. With stated preferences, what that looks like for those who don't geek out on surveys, what that ends up looking like is you ask someone, given the choice between giving Meta access to all of your information so that you can use an agentic AI system versus versus not doing that, but then you won't have quite as good recommendations, what would be your willingness to pay in that case, basically, or what are the trade-offs that you would take in it? And by doing that, you're able to like quantify basically people's preferences. And then through the preferences, you get to a societal preference. So it's an individual way to get at group preference, and you can add a lot of different things. I think with that too, we would also add things like the harm or different groups. So like prioritizing, understanding how data impacts different populations differently. And again, that's why like the broader look. But yeah, happy to talk about it more, but hopefully that helps to answer it a little bit.
Thank you. My name is Kendra. I'm an MPP student at American University. I was curious to know more about your research process. I'm a bit familiar with cost benefit and generally as well with some of the other looking into the regulatory framework. So I would be really curious to know when you wrote policy briefs or when you, then this is to all the panelists as well, how you went about finding the data to get to your results that you presented to us today.
I'll say very quickly, I started with a literature review. So this idea is something that a lot of people have thought of. And then I haven't come up with like, here's the number. I think that's going to be a long-term effort for a lot of different people. But as someone who used to be an MPP student and now works with data and privacy, I think that you can solve all questions if you have the right data. And a lot of times what I've done in the past is like link data sets in interesting ways. So I don't know if that helps with your future thesis.
I have the great advantage of being one of very many people talking about agentic AI and security. But I read everything and start knitting it all together, which I think is probably a reasonable approach, but it's just lots of curiosity. And then I throw together a PowerPoint.
It's a great question, actually. So for this particular research, it was really a very much old school investigative work that comes with research. I saw this one tax code that made no sense for me why it would exist, and that wasn't related to AI. And I was just, looking through IRS tax code, the fun times, hours and hours, and I found all of this. So I think there's still a lot of value. We, as researchers, we have all these AI tools, which is excellent, but there's a lot of value in good old school, grinding, looking at data, looking at lots of literature, reading more, and doing the hard work of research yourself so you understand the lay of the land.
It's not exactly what you're asking, but the stuff talked about with respect to brain-computer interfaces, I started with Google Scholar and stuff like that, and I had the advantage that I was working for the White House at the time, and it's amazing when you call anybody up and say, "Hi, I'm from the White House. Could you help me understand this?" People tend to say yes, and so that was helpful, but even if you're not from the White House, most researchers are happy to talk to you about their research. It's how they get their jollies. People go into research because they want to talk to people about the great things they're inventing. And so, like when I was at NSF, I would have junior faculty who would say, "I'm afraid to talk to a program officer because you're high and mighty." No, we're not high and mighty. We put on our pants one leg at a time, just like you. So I guess the advice, which is not exactly what you're asking, but I think related, is don't be afraid to ask, even if you're young and starting out. Most people are really anxious to help you.
Oh, I think we need more data when we're talking about AI systems. So, very much about asking for disclosures, asking for transparency. So I think this is a challenge we're going to run into studying AI systems more independently, but that's why I'm happy that there's some creative ideas here. But doesn't mean we don't push for more data to study and understand these AI systems.
Hi, this question is for Mr. Evsine. So I know you discussed the small modular reactors. I was curious between the policy makers and also the computer scientists if you've seen a difference in their attitudes towards that approach for like powering data centers. On the policy side, which is what I've interacted with more, I've seen a lot of people, go from enthusiastic endorsement to like skepticism. So I was wondering if you've seen a shift in that attitude.
So I haven't been working in that space long enough to see a shift. What I can tell you, though, is what I've seen over the course of my career. I did a lot of work in voting systems and elections, and computer scientists tend to be more skeptical, at least academic computer scientists tend to be more skeptical of technology than you might think. You might think they're rah-rah. Well, sometimes they are and sometimes they're not. I think the people I talk to who are working in SMRs are excited about the potential for power, but also very concerned about the risks. And I think that's pretty typical of most academics right now. I'm not sure where policy people are on that, so I can't answer that part of it. And I wanted to point out, so I'm a computer scientist. I go to a lot of conferences and speak a lot, and there is a huge problem in computer science with manels. I am so thrilled to be here with 4 wonderful, brilliant women.